What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Varandas, and today we got freedom fighter Adam Kokesh versus mixed mental artist Hunter Maats for the first Ripple Effect roundtable debate. And hopefully there'll be more of these in the future, but I took two guests that I love and I love listening to, and I think are interesting and have very well thought out perspectives, and I figured I'd try to get them together to do this. I figured if I was going to try doing this Ripple Effect Roundtable, then these two guests would be the perfect guys to try to do it with. And if you're not familiar with Adam Kokesh, he's the author of Freedom, which is a book that you can get for free online, and we talk more about it on the show, so you hear about it. And he also had a show called Adam vs. the Man. He's been interviewed everywhere. He's a very popular activist and libertarian. And Hunter Maats is the author of The Straight A Conspiracy and podcast host to Mixed Mental Arts with Brian Callen. So check all that stuff out, and I'll have the links in the show notes on our YouTube channel. And so do that and share this show. In the past, I've told you guys, if you want to support the show, I started a Patreon page recently. But this show specifically, I think, is much more important. Instead of financially helping the show, share the show. Spread the conversation. Spread these ideas. Spread just the idea of being open to ideas. I know that sounds silly, but that's really the goal of this show and the goal of this conversation. I think we definitely achieved it. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. On our YouTube channel, you'll be able to find links to all Adam's sites and Hunter's sites, their show, their YouTube channel, their website, their Twitter, all that stuff. And so it's an easy way of finding it. All you have to do is search RV Theory 6 or the Ripple Effect Podcast on YouTube, and you'll find it. Or you can go to therippleeffectpodcast.com and find the show there. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Hello?
Adam, there you are. Now,
Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, I am really sorry about this, guys. I have been in a difficult logistic situation, and I am just getting parked right now and in a position to do this. But my car's in the shop. I got a new phone, and I'm setting up. I am full of good excuses today, but I won't waste any of your time. I'm ready to do this. I got a quiet spot. I got a good connection, and I'm really psyched. So thank you for making this happen.
Adam, we already have something in common because my car is in the shop, and that's why I'm not doing this from home. So clearly, you know, there you go.
All right, so we're just getting parked here. I have a friend who's helping me get set up.
And do you want
to get? We need the windows up and the AC on low. I believe is going to be the way to do this.
Do you want to give us a call back when you have everything set up, or do you want us to wait? Or
No, we're good. I'm going to grab these bananas and use them to prop my phone up. Yeah. Let's see.
Jesus.
No, wait. We got a water bottle. We don't have to use the bananas. We're pro here.
Didn't need the government's help to figure that one out, did you?
There we go. All right. Whew. How's my sound? Is it clear enough with the AC running here?
Yeah, I can't really hear the AC. I think right now we're all talking over one another. So, but once we get one at a time, I think we should be fine. All
right. Oh, I should take my seatbelt off. Excuse me, and probably put these bananas away. All right.
So, well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for doing this. I really appreciate it. Obviously, I'm a fan of both of you, of Hunter's and Adam's, because that's why I had you guys on as guests in the first place. But because I am a very curious person, I think a lot of people that you guys are trying to reach are people like myself. I mean, I just came from working in the rain pouring cement, and now I'm trying to take in some information. And I think the average person is very much like myself. They're trying to consume as much information as possible, trying to figure out and self-analyze what they believe, why they believe it, and and try to challenge themselves. And I think there is a desire for this type of conversation, and I thought you guys were the perfect people to have on for this because both of you are very willing to have discussions with people who disagree with you, and very respectful in that manner too, and in your ability to share ideas, challenge ideas, and not get defensive, and you know, and get to the point where it becomes personal and not about the ideas themselves. So to quote Hunter, let's try to have some idea sex. and
oh, dude, that's the most beautiful introduction you could possibly have for this. Thank you.
Ricky, what does that make you?
I'm
Are
blushing.
you like Barry White?
Yeah,
or,
I think so.
You know.
So, but in all seriousness, thank you so much, guys. I really, truly appreciate it. I do think that there's a urge and want and for these type of conversations. I'm sure you guys have had many discussions with people that talk about watching a debate that changed their life perspective, or you know, just seeing two intellectual people going at it and really helping mold their opinions. Because I think that sometimes that's the best way of doing it. Is if I don't know where I stand, you get somebody who believes one perspective, somebody who believes another, and let them go at it and kind of challenge each other and see what you get out of it from the spectator. So at times, because I don't stand anywhere. At times, I might just be a spectator, and at times, if I might challenge something one of you guys say. If you don't challenge each other before that, also, you know, Hunter's talked about, you know, if you guys want to go at it or not go at it. I mean, obviously, I think you guys are very friendly, so I think neither of you will take it personally if you challenge each other to any extent. If I feel like you guys are being too friendly, I might ask you to say something about the other person's mother, just to kind of piss. But in all seriousness, so for listeners who are listening and don't know, who might not know you guys, and I'm sure there's going to be some. Hopefully, this does extend past you know, Adam's listeners, Hunter's listeners, and my listeners. Hopefully, people run into this in many different places. And for people who are listening who don't know your background, your work, if you guys want to give a brief description on just, you know, some of your background. You both are authors. You've written books. Maybe what philosophies are in those books, and what you're trying, and what your goal is in those books, and what philosophy you're trying to share with the public. Yeah, I don't know which one wants to go first. If we go in alphabetical,
Adam first.
I was going to say, if we go in alphabetical order, it's Adam.
Yep.
Well, since I lost the coin toss, yeah. So I gotta explain like this thing about my car breaking down first, because I feel like I made a very awkward entrance there. It's actually because I'm on a 68 city national tour right now. We are in Encinitas, California, in the San Diego area, on our way to Los Angeles tonight for another event. And then tomorrow, if you can't make it tonight in LA, we're at a Autism Speak celebrity poker tournament, which I'm very excited about. But this is a book tour for me. It's the third one I've done with my book Freedom, which lays out the ideal of the voluntary philosophy, which is quite simple, that all human relationships should be free of force and coercion and violence, that we should relate to each other voluntarily, that everybody should have the opportunity to choose to opt out of any relationship, that you have that freedom of choice, and that no one forces anything on anybody else. You have respect for those individual rights. So the philosophy is really at the core of libertarianism, which is self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, which is to say that you, as a free, beautiful, independent human being, own yourself, and that this is the foundation of your rights and the foundation of your ability to own property, which is intrinsically connected with that. So how do we apply this? When we see the ideal of a stateless society, a lot of people think that what we want to do is, impose our preferences for that or take over. And the great libertarian slogan, or at least my favorite, is we want to take over or diligently plotting to take over the world so that we can leave everybody alone. And while that very much sums it up, I think there's a new direction within our movement towards localization. And this is something that I captured in my book, which I started writing when I was in jail for civil disobedience in Washington, D.C. I give it away on tour. I give it away digitally in every format possible, including audiobook. It's got over 2 million downloads. It's in its fourth printing with 55,000 copies in print. And we're just spreading the word, waking people up one at a time, if that's what it takes, so we get to a critical mass of people who see this vision for humanity moving forward to a stateless society, to a universally nonviolent and free society. And we apply this politically by embracing, like I said, localization. And right now it's really exciting to see that there's so much support for my presidential campaign in 2020, which started in 2012 as a joke when at Bilderberg meeting, the original info warrior Jason Burmis asked me, well, what would you do if you were president? And I said, quit, go home, and get a real job. And somehow I kept joking about it, and people started taking it seriously. And next thing you know, we're organizing delegates on this tour, recruiting volunteers. And I guess just a little way of background about myself. My motivation for all of this started, I got to hand it to people like you, really, both Hunter and Ricky, for the sort of intellectual initiative that you have shown that I must say that I lack, in the sense that I had to go to Iraq for myself to get the kick in the ass that I needed to start thinking openly, questioning authority thoroughly, and looking for a better way forward for humanity. So for me, it was, seeing people die in Iraq, knowing that, political debates are not just something that you want to be right about, but they really are a matter of life and death, and that we take these issues seriously and face up to the biggest challenges before humanity is really important. So, I had to go through that, and I had to learn the hard way. It's taken me a long time to get to where I am philosophically, and it's really because, there are people like you who lead the conversation intellectually in a sort of more intrinsically intellectually motivated way, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. So, Hunter, your turn.
Well, firstly, I have read Adam's book, and I'm glad to say that Freedom is free, available for download online, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The second thing I would say is that, like Adam, I may not have had to go to Iraq, but I did have to go to places like Libya. I was born in Saudi Arabia, grew up in Brazil, very close to the favelas. And saw a tremendous income disparity. Brian Callen, my co-host on Mixed Mental Arts, always jokes that we saw great poverty from inside an air-conditioned vehicle. So that was very much my childhood. And so, like Adam, I would agree that, political debates have huge consequences for people's lives in every area. And the important thing is to create the most realistic, inclusive system possible. And I ultimately ended up going through sort of the scientific approach to that. And so for me, I believe that reality is a thing that exists. It exists outside of our heads, and that humans have a terrible track record of figuring out what it is. And so it's, I joke that reality is our lower power, and that we're all desperately trying to connect with our lower power, and that individual humans, I think, are very bad at doing it. I mean, the whole point of a blind spot is that you're blind to it. So you don't know the things that you're missing until you're with people who think differently, who challenge you. And so, initially, the book I wrote is A Straight A Conspiracy, which was really focused on the wacky things that kids believe about their intelligence. Like, I didn't get the math gene, I don't have a natural ear for languages, I'm just not a natural writer, that are really just self-defeating prophecies. But from that evolved this podcast, Mixed Mental Arts, which is really focused on taking all these ideas that pile up in academia and are never compiled into a usable form that people can actually use to make better decisions. Like Adam, also, my car is not working. And specifically, I think what's important here is that it's a new used car. So I bought it literally, I think, on Tuesday with 20,000 miles on the clock, and it's already not working. And this gets to, it does have a 100,000 extended bumper-to-bumper warranty, so that's good. But the point is, this gets to a really important point, which is, how do you make sure you don't buy a lemon? And I clearly don't know enough about cars to not buy a lemon.
Same here.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing is that, because of this idea of political decisions really mattering, And because this reality thing is so hard for humans to figure out, I just don't want humanity to buy a lemon, because we have a long history of buying political lemons, like communism turned out to be a political lemon, right? Like, we got sold it by the used car dealer that was Vladimir Lenin, and then we took it out for a test drive, and pretty quickly it broke down, and then Stalin happened. So I just think, yeah, how do we avoid political lemons, and how do we all become smarter political shoppers?
Yeah, that's well, yeah, I think that's a good way of getting into this, because you have read Adam's book, and is there any critiques that stick out immediately that you think you would want to expand on with Adam? Oh, and also, before we get into that, a weird coincidence that just hit me. My truck didn't break down today, but my employees' trucks, it broke down today. A pulley seized, and the belt almost snapped, and it smoked up and stuff. So this is a weird coincidence that everybody had automotive issues today.
Well, you know, I have a mechanic who's a libertarian and has studied this, and it is actually quite mind-blowing when you look at it, how much crappier our vehicles are than they need to be because of government. And if you didn't have government, of course, we'd all have flying cars by now. But you can look at the vehicles that we drive and the regulations, excuse me, on the metal that goes into the solder and the electronics, and why there are failures in these things. And it's mind-blowing. And I'm all for, don't get me wrong, environmental protections in the industry. I think that's super important. And, you know, here in California, it's a big issue with smog checks. But the way that the government does it, of course, gets it all wrong and has all sorts of terrible unintended consequences. And less reliable vehicles is one of those.
Well, what's your opinion on Ralph Nader helping make cars a little safer? Because before that, people were dying in car accidents, you know, because of steering wheels and all type of stuff that before seat belts and stuff.
Yeah, I think that the research that Ralph Nader did was amazing and super powerful and absolutely critical to vehicle safety. I've met Ralph Nader. He's a great dude. I have immense respect for him. And obviously we have the political difference, which is I applied the philosophy of nonviolence to the problem. Do we need to force people to do something that's in their best interest? And I think what we're dealing with now is some of the unintended consequences of some of things, you know, that have been written into law by government in the vehicle industry that prevent progress, even when what he was doing in raising those issues was critical to progress. Now, I wasn't there at the time. I'm not an expert on this. There might not have been a better avenue, so I can't blame him for using government as a way to bring those issues to the forefront, but I would have always preferred to pursue a nonviolent or non-coercive, non-government solution to those issues.
Hunter, would you
I think that that brings up like a whole bunch of the different parts of, I think, what we have to break down, right? So the first thing is checks and balances, right? Do there need to be checks and balances on industry? What happens if industry is left to do its own thing? Where does it go? The second thing, which is pretty common in libertarian thinking, is the idea that there should be no coercion, right? Like, as you said, the nonviolent principle is huge there. And obviously, violence is not pleasant. You've seen a lot of it having been in Iraq. And, you know, we should do everything we can to minimize violence. But the big question is the government's monopoly on legitimate violence a bug or a feature? And I think it's a feature. And I think you think it's a bug. And that's
I agree that it's a feature. No, I absolutely agree that it's a feature, because I think it's important to understand the premise of government, which is to serve the people who sponsor it. And in that case, it is absolutely a feature for that purpose.
Well, and I think, you know, I mean, the irony, right? You were in Iraq, and if you look at what happens when dictators are removed, what then is created is a power vacuum. But
right, I don't favor revolution, and I think I was very clear in the book about that this is an evolutionary process, and I think you would appreciate at a different level how the one thing that I bring to libertarianism that I think is somewhat unique among people who are working to spread this message, which is the longer view of human history. We live in the most peaceful times ever. You are less likely today, and this I cite Professor Steven Pinker of Harvard and his TED Talk, The Surprising Decline in Violence. And I don't think, aside from the caveats of, nuclear war wiping us all out or an asteroid taking out the Earth. There's anything that would reverse the trends that drive that decline in violence, and freedom being essentially defined by nonviolence. This is a beautiful way of tracking human progress.
Well, and this is great that we're taking this longer view of human history, because cultural evolution is really what most of mixed mental arts is about. And so if you look at, the rise of large-scale societies, you start off with small tribes that have a size of about 150. And what emerges first are these sort of pharaoh-type rulers who are large, unaccountable, and are focused on the emotion of awe. And then more and more institutions evolve. You start to get rule of law with the Glorious Revolution, and then you get greater accountability with the democracy, and greater checks and balances, and more inclusive systems. But I think that's the problem is that periodically, like Marx, you see that there is some problem with some aspect of the society. And Marx was like, clearly there's massive income inequality. So starting from the principle of equality, let's just strip out business. And in the same way, I think the libertarians have made the same mistake that their hated enemies, the communists, have made, which is to see that there is this bug in freedom, which is government. And they say, why not just strip out government? And I think the point is to have better checks and balances on all the different aspects of our society, not to simply remove some feature.
Well, actually, it's really the continuation of this phasing out of violence that we advocate. And a lot of libertarians do present the ideal and might be guilty of giving you that wrong impression. And a lot of them simply disagree with me. I mean, libertarianism is simply this ethical concept. It really does not prescribe a strategy or anything else. It simply states that the only justified use of violence is in defense or self-defense or defense of someone else. That it's never justified to initiate violence, to start something with someone else if it's not defensive. I mean, pretty simple, basic ethical concept that we all take for granted and don't seem to see in government. Don't hit, don't steal, don't kill is not, unless you're a cop or an IRS agent or a soldier. Those are universal moral values for a reason. Now, squaring that ideal with reality is something that we all do a little bit differently. And what I propose, and again, not unique, and like I said in my book, I don't claim originality for any of these ideas, simply presenting them as a comprehensive worldview on this general subject and a way forward on the issue of social organization, is that we move forward in localizing government. We don't want to pull the rug out from underneath anybody. And I think what's really amazing, we see in the intellectual development of the libertarian movement that more and more people are coming to the same conclusion kind of on their own or through their own routes. I was just in Malta with Hans Hermann Hoppe, who's a very renowned, more of a right-leaning libertarian intellectual who's for a long time been presenting the ideal of, community-based enclaves. You see,
mean like city-states?
Almost, yes, but they would be voluntary and private property and agreement-based.
Would those city-states war? Would they compete
Probably
for territory?
Not. I think it would be extremely unlikely, because right now you have, the government monopoly on security, which is a military. And frankly, the founders of America got it right when they said that we shouldn't have a standing army. And history has shown us that the best defense of a nation or a people or a community is a well-armed population that refuses to be governed by anyone. Or even if it's not well-armed, if it's trained in resistance and knows how to be not submissive, refusing to be governed by anyone. That's how Gandhi got the British out of India. And that's really what a righteous means of self-defense would be, not this idea of a violent monopoly that inevitably leads to corruption and unnecessary foreign adventures or entangling alliances, as the founders would have called them.
I'm glad that you brought up what the founders said, right? Because, if you look at the history of
authority.
That's exactly right. And everybody agrees that the founding fathers were great. They just disagree on what they actually believed, right? My dad was the best, but let me just tell you that you don't know my dad. I know my dad.
Right. Sure.
But, you have these, the long history is that if you have a bunch of city-states, that they're going to war and they're going to compete for territory. And I think the genius of the founding fathers, and, why did we move from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution? Because we needed to federalize. We needed to have more stability and more organization. And crucially, Madison wrote in Federalist 51, if men were angels, we would not need governments. And the challenge is that in setting up governments over men, you first have to make the government able to rule the people and then challenge them to be governed themselves. And so what we need are checks and balances. But this all comes back to, I had an interview with Peter Schiff, and Peter Schiff told me this line, which it turns out is from Barry Goldwater, and it's that, the government is like a camel. And, if you just let it, it starts to get its nose under the tent, and before you know it, it's just grown and grown and grown and grown, and that's why you're just better off not having any camel. And I've spent time in the Middle East. You've spent time in the Middle East. It's the most fucking idiotic thing I've ever heard. If your camel is acting up, you don't shoot the camel. You get the people together to tie the camel up. So if you want to tie the camel up, I'm with you, Adam. But if you want to shoot the camel, then I think that we're going to have a huge, huge problem.
No, I want to give the camel a nice retirement and let it die slowly, peacefully,
I know what nice
a natural death. A natural peaceful death. I'm a consumer choice vegan, by the way, so no, I would not be shooting any camels.
Oh, thank God for that. But the point is that if the camel stopped being fed and then died of starvation, you'd be cool with that.
No, if it well, then now we're just getting silly with the metaphor, but yeah, we were talking about something serious, weren't we? Oh yeah, the Constitution, Articles of Confederation. No, I think the Constitution was written by people who wanted to profit from that new centralized power, like Hamilton, who wanted a central bank. Well,
they may have had a profit incentive, but in the same way, corporations are founded by people who want to profit from the power of the corporation. Like that's human nature.
Right, and so like you said, as we have in the progress of governance, that there has been a distribution of power, and excuse me for paraphrasing what you said here, but that there is a distribution of power that has happened over time, that is the mark of the progress of civilization. I think similarly, what we have now is corporations that are only somewhat accountable to their customers because they're protected by government corporatist policies and regulations that limit, if not prevent, competition, especially if you look at like the oil and gas industry, where you have this massive oligopoly that leads to all sorts of distortions of what the market would provide. And the way that we distribute that power as equitably as possible is to have a place where everybody's voice is respected. And that place, more than anything, is the market. But how we get there first is to have a market for governments by decentralizing them as much as possible. And I think you see as an immediate step forward, if you want government to be tied down, then we agree on the first step here, which is to localize it. And if I may segue to something that I think is a much more immediate practice. Excuse me?
We don't agree on the first step. I don't think the problem is to localize it. I mean, I think that you have to find what is the balance between federalism and what is the balance between local government and what are the proper delegations of power. I think the first step and the real problem, Adam, is to go back to your own experience, is that you were politically disengaged. And then you had to go to Iraq and have a wake-up call and get politically engaged. And I think it's fantastic that you're politically engaged. But the majority of the public, as you say, is not like Ricky and me. They're not reading, they're not questioning, and they're not engaged. And so I think all the camels have gone wild. The camel of government has gone wild. The camel of corporations has gone wild. The camel of social justice has gone wild. The camel of all these different political ideologies has gone wild. And the time is now here to wake the public up and be like, your herd of camels has gone nuts. Now you have to tie them down. You have to figure out what is shit and what is shinola. But I think that the idea that you have to, localize government, now you're talking about city-states. Now you're talking about ultimately heading towards militias. And now you're talking to interfactional violence. Or more simply, it just may be that you're not able to effectively coordinate because you don't have any sort of federal organization, which was the problem of the Articles of Confederation. You couldn't effectively tax and you couldn't effectively organize any sort of national defense.
So you think we have problems with international trade now that wouldn't be better resolved by having one world government? What is your principle in applying?
I think we should have we already do have one world government. It's just weak and ineffective. So if you look at what happened with the Paris Climate Accords, we tried to coordinate on this shared problem of global warming. And then what happened was that Trump simply walked away from the table. right? So it's not an effective level of coordination. I think we're very much the same place that the United States was with the Articles of Confederation, where you have a lot of different nation states that can't effectively coordinate, that aren't really accountable to their people because the people are asleep and it's been too long since World War II. We all need to wake up and we all need to have serious conversations. But in terms of a reality-based solution, if you actually look at the cultural evolution and if you understand the underlying human psychology, which is always the foundational assumption of any system of government, is what do you believe about human nature? Right? And so if we want to get down to these things, we might have to get down to, for example, your moral intuitions about freedom, right? And to believe, do you believe that freedom is a thing, or do you believe that freedom is good?
Freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you in any way. It describes the status of an ethical society.
But see, that's the problem. Ethical society, Marx described an ethical society. He said that equality is good, and that an ethical society would be equal. And from that theoretical principle, he then built out an entire model of a society that bore no correlation to reality.
Right, exactly, because his model of property rights was actually contrary to the reality that we know of self-ownership, that by virtue of being an independent consciousness in a physical body, that we are responsible for those actions. And I will disagree with you on something really important here that actually I only changed on somewhat recently here, and it's this idea of taking leadership within the realm of areas of expertise. We have this sort of false ideal of egalitarianism foisted upon us by modern liberal education. But the reality is that we accept leadership in all sorts of fields in our life, and it's sort of silly to deny it. And the example that I use when I give talks sometimes is fashion. And I'll point out that in the audience, nobody designed their own clothing, that if I was a leader in the fashion industry, I could look down my nose at them and call them followers or sheeple in that regard. But for those of us that do care about these things, it's okay for us to say, yes, we are going to take charge. We are going to be leaders in this regard. We see a way forward to a more ethical society. We see a way forward that meets everyone's needs. We see a way forward to create immediate policy that makes people's lives better by embracing a consistent theory of ethics and property rights. And we want to show the world that, hey, all we want is your consent to be able to dismantle institutions that are clearly not serving humanity, that are holding us back because they are fundamentally based and precipitated upon the assumed right to do unethical things.
No, I think what they're founded on is the realities of human nature. And I think we can evolve better systems and we can evolve more accountable systems so that you minimize the need for violence. But in the same way that when you start from a theoretical principle...
Hold on. I gotta stop you to make you more precise. You say that the reality of human nature, that doesn't, what is that? Now, I'm not saying there is no such thing, but you can't just throw that out and say, because the reality of human nature, because it's a really false accusation implied here to say that I'm ignoring human nature. I would say that my philosophy here is more in line with the reality of human nature, that we are independent creatures, that we do have self-ownership, and that nonviolent relationships are more productive and more inducive of human happiness than coercive violent relationships.
Adam, did you think it was my birthday? Because you just gave me the greatest gift that you could have ever given me. You have now walked into my wheelhouse. Now we're going to talk about biology and we're going to talk about human nature. This is amazing. So I think there are a couple of things, right?
And I will interrupt one more time to say I am truly interested to learn from you in this.
Okay, good. So, and if you show yourself to be the kind of candidate who is really willing to update their mind in light of evidence, no matter what it may be, then you have my vote in 2020. So how about that? Because I think that's the thing, is I don't really care who sits in the chair. I care about their principles and their values and their commitment to, reality, whatever she may be. So there you go. So to that end, the first thing that I think that's important to understand is this idea of individualism, right? Our humans, there's a strong notion of individualism in America, and that's a very American idea. It's not a universal idea. It's not a thing that exists in all cultures. So, for example, East Asian cultures tend to be much more collectivist. The Scandinavians are much more collectivist. So that's not a universal, okay?
We don't oppose collectives. We only oppose forced collectives.
Well, but I think regardless, it's important to recognize that the idea of an individual is a conception. It's a cultural creation, yes. Right? And
it's a construct, an intellectual construct. Yes,
it's an intellectual construct, exactly, right? And so you can see certain patterns by looking at yourself or someone else as an individual, and then you'll see other patterns by looking at people as groups, right? And certainly a lot of our choices are influenced by the people around us, right? You pick up the norms and the values of your society, and they dictate what you do or what you don't think. So, for example, if you walk around a lot of America, it's regarded as, essentially politics is something that you don't really talk about, right? You don't really talk about religion. And so the result is that we never actually really talk out most of these problems. But that's not because people aren't necessarily interested. You've become interested through your experience in Iraq. Ricky has become interested. I've become interested because of all of our experiences. So what we're really dealing with here is then is culture. And that's the big thing to understanding human nature, is that humanity's superpower is not that we are, if you give a chimp, an orangutan, and a human toddler an IQ test, you'll find that humans are dumber than chimps on spatial reasoning, dumber than chimps on math and quantitative reasoning, dumber than chimps on causality and why things happen. And there's only one area in which we're off the charts, and that's social intelligence. We are amazing at learning from others. And that has been our great achievement, is cumulative cultural evolution. We keep on acquiring better and better tools for engaging with reality. And I think the real problem that I have with any sort of worldview that aims to sort of throw some sort of institution out rather than evolve it, or, sort of gently let it die, right? Which was a lot of the same narrative that the Marxists and the communists said, was that, that yes, capitalism was a necessary phase, but ultimately it would disappear. And that's very much the same narrative that you're offering for government, is that, this cultural evolution is cumulative. And I think that the big question that I have for you, Adam, as I consider whether to vote for you in 2020, is, do you believe that internal checks and balances within some sort of institution or industry is enough? Or do you think you also need external checks?
I would say it depends on the industry, and it's probably both. I mean, that question at the end of everything you were going on kind of like changed things a little bit for me there. Because I was really focused on what you were saying about what sounded like a very powerful model that we both share of this sense of human progress. And I think what I would have to offer, as the sort of what I would say is my much smaller area of focus in this, is the issue of force and violence in society. So a lot of people, when we say, mistake the understanding of what we mean by no government, or when we define government as an institution of a monopoly on coercion. It doesn't mean that there might be, without that coercion, greater institutions. It might mean that there are bigger collectives. It might mean that we have totally different institutions that we can't imagine. And when the proposition is posed of, the stateless society, a lot of people say, what about this? What about that? And I think these are all very valid questions, which is why I have to say, ultimately, I don't know. I simply have confidence that nonviolent relations are more productive than violent relationships. And I look for a practical way to move forward to that. So I agree with you. And I say that this is, definitely has to be a gradual evolutionary process. I don't advocate for a revolution, except the revolution of the mind. And I think you're right to point out that in the social intelligence and learning from each other, humanity progresses, and the internet is already such a huge force in this, in bringing people together. And when you look at the nature of violence as it relates to government and freedom, you see that where we have less violence, we are happier, we are more productive, we are more harmonious. And I really think it's unfortunate that a lot of our ideas in the past have been misrepresented as based on individualism, because that might be the easiest way to describe it, but it could be, like I said earlier, just as easily described as voluntarism, that in the relationships, it's voluntary. So I'm sorry to bring it back finally to your question here with the idea of should we have checks and balances just within industry or outside of industry. It's going to depend on what people want. So if you have, for example, in electronics today, Underwriters Laboratories, which is the one that they put the little stickers at the bottom of your lamps and all of your little home electronic appliances that rate them as safe for consumer consumption, that they're not going to blow up on you. When there's a need for that and that's supported, I think we should have that. And I absolutely think that when we have those things without government, they're going to be a lot more in line with the needs of the people. So when I talk about dissolving the federal government, it's not to abolish it. Some agencies need to be preserved as private institutions. I use the example of the VA as my favorite one. Although I don't know if you want me to keep going on this because I'm getting a little bit off your question. I want to let you give you a chance.
Well, I just think so. There's voluntarism, right? And listen, none of us chose the passport that we got. I didn't choose to have an American passport. Neither did either of you. But nor did Libyans choose to have a Libyan passport. And if I was given a choice between having a Libyan passport and a U.S. passport, I'm going to choose a U.S. passport. There are far better labor opportunities. It's much more secure. And, Adam, you've had experience of that part of the world. You know what it's like. But there are certain libertarians who drive me fucking nuts because they grew up in the world's greatest gated community. Yeah, Tom Woods for one. Because it's like, okay, great. The reality is that Ricky and I, if your libertarian vision happens and turns into some sort of, post-Saddam wasteland, I think, Adam, you'll be fine. I think you're going to be great. You'll be like Rick in The Walking Dead, and you'll, establish a community. It'll be awesome. Ricky and I are fucked, and at that point, we'll die, right? But so will Tom Woods, because, he looks like Piggy from Lord of the Flies, and he's just not going to do well in a stateless society. So no,
you're scaring me. No, but you're I understand your misrepresentation here. But when we look at the root causes of this, and again, this is where I'm saying this is my area of expertise that I have focused on, is the use of force and violence in society, is that it is the institutions of force and violence now that are by far the greatest source of violence, not individuals. And you get rid of those. I would make the case, unacademically albeit, that 90+% of the violence in the world today is done in the name of governments. And at least in the United States, we see of the remaining 10%, 90% of that is related to the war on drugs and to government-induced poverty. And if you get government out of the way of people taking care of each other and meeting each other's needs, we're going to have a much more peaceful, much more harmonious, much more interconnected society than we have today. It is violence that keeps people apart, and that's what governments have to offer. When we get government localized down to the community level, our international institutions will be based on the needs of people and the desires of people to help each other. Humans naturally do want to help each other, and we are progressing and getting better at it and more capable and more productive and more interconnected every day.
And I totally agree with that. And I think that part of what's going to lead to is greater accountability on government. Yes. As people better understand what the camel is up to, more people will get together and tie it up. But I think let's run with your statistic, Adam. Let's imagine that 90%, and I don't know that this is true, but let's imagine that 90% of violence is committed by governments. The question is not, is 90% of violence committed by government? It's when you remove government, do you get more or less violent? And the experience of stateless societies is you get more violence. Because what happens is that when there is that Leviathan sitting over society, it means that people have to resolve their conflicts judicially. And if you have a system like the United States where there is rule of law, then most people have pretty good access to the courts. But if you have no Leviathan, then people resolve their differences extrajudicially. So now I just go kill the motherfucker who trespassed on my land or looked at my sister or whatever. So I think the point is, it's not that I'm not even saying that governments aren't violent. Governments are violent. I just think that they're less violent than the alternative.
I think your case might be legitimate in the past. I think pre-internet. I think that case could be made, and I think there's a lot of subjectives in this case, and I kind of don't want to get too into it because obviously we could impose different metrics. And again, I go back to the one core metric of Steven Pinker's work, which is death by violence, and that most of it is connected to war. And people who trade, frankly, don't fight. And in the age of the internet, I think you're really right to point out here that government has been responsible for a major effect in terms of what you describe. I would make the case that that's because we have the social and technological mechanisms of communication and technology that so far government has used in order to, with its monopoly power, to monopolize things, like you say, that have brought reductions in violence and accountability. However, in this day and age, it is clear that we have a much greater mechanism of accountability now within the market than we could ever possibly have with government. And at this point, the only reason that a government needs to exist is to limit the accountability to the people. Because, hey, if you could withdraw your support like that when a dispute resolution organization put out a bad decision and put an innocent person in jail, those people would go out of business. When it's government, how do you reform the court system and end something like the war on drugs? It takes decades and decades and millions of lives destroyed and lost. And that's the reality of government today. We've outgrown this. It's time to phase it out. Let's do it in a responsible way. We can localize government as a first step in the right direction. We can introduce real competition among governments when we get them down to the community level. We can build international institutions that are far more effective than the United Nations, which is still obviously founded by governments. And you're right, you might be right to point out that it is a check on international violence, but a better check would be to not allow governments to have militaries anymore because it's archaic and outdated and completely obsolete in the age of the internet.
But let's look to the, what did the system look like before there was government? Before you have large-scale government of any kind, you have band-level genocide. That's what Steven, in terms of the high point of violence that Steven Pinker is talking about, you have band-level genocide. And again, the Leviathan comes in and sits on top of that.
I would say there's a simple semantic distinction that you might be missing here, because when I talk about it, and I mentioned in the book that the first government was, whoever could pick up the biggest rock was in charge of the tribe or the clan or the family group, and that's government. So you might be right to point out that consolidation of government at some point has coincided with greater, broader accountability, and that has led to peace. I would not dispute that.
Great. So the point is that government reduced violence in the distant past. More accountable government has had to...
No. It's not that government reduced violence. It's that government itself became less violent as it progressed.
But before government, right, when we were
there is no before government.
There is before government. There's how hunter-gatherers behave.
And the guy who could pick up the biggest rock and said, screw you, I'm in charge, that guy was government.
See, unfortunately, Adam, this is where you've talked about how you've been narrowly focused on this one particular issue. And the problem is that there's a whole world of academia out there, and you've now wandered into my territory and my domain. So this is where Robin Dunbar's work becomes so important, because every animal has a natural group size. And for humans, the natural group size is about 150. That's how many relationships we can track. And what that means is that, counter to what most people believe, tribes are actually remarkably egalitarian. There's relatively low intra-tribal violence. There's high inter-tribal violence, but low intra-tribal violence. And it works remarkably well. The big dislocation was agriculture, because agriculture is why you then start to get societies that are far larger than 150 people. Yeah. But the point is that the intertribal violence was very high, it seems. So actually tribes were, and Jared Diamond told us a great story about how there were these two neighboring tribes. They got on very well for a long time, and then there was some sort of environmental stress. There was a drought, there wasn't enough food available, and so one of the tribes goes off and starts telling stories about the other tribe. And in a half an hour, they talk themselves into convincing themselves that the other tribe are vermin and rodents, and that they need to be eliminated. They trigger those disgust mechanisms, and then they go and they wipe out the entire tribe. That ability to dehumanize people and to convince ourselves that some other group are vermin or rodents or rats, which we see in every single Holocaust, from the Armenian genocide to the Holocaust that happened in World War II, to the Hutus and the Tutsis, to ethnic cleansing in Yugoslavia. That sort of modality is part of our human psychology. And when you have this descent into sort of genocidal behavior, who is there to stop it? The government. The Leviathan, who has that massive ability to apply violence to stop genocide.
It also has the power to magnify it to the scale of atomic warfare.
Oh, yes, it does. And that is the double-edged sword of government. Is this that, I mean, we can see that right in World War II. The Nazis were a government that perpetrated genocide, and then the Allies were a group of governments that got together to stop that genocide. So, that is the double-edged. I'm not saying that
you wouldn't say that Nagasaki and Hiroshima were a form of genocide?
They were a form of the Leviathan using its massive cudgel to stop a war. And that's, how many people died. If you want to talk about should the atomic bombings have happened, well, then you have to talk about Operation Downfall. And again, this is about trade-offs. Did a lot of people die in a horrible way in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Yes. Would more people have died if you'd engaged in Operation Downfall? I think they would have. I think those projections are pretty, you could argue about the numbers, but I think that, yes, a land invasion of Japan with the state of fervor that they were in, going off of the sort of numbers that you saw in Iwo Jima and Okinawa, yes, it would have led to far more deaths. So we're not talking about, ideal situations. We're talking about trade-offs, and we're talking about less bad options. And I think that, the government is a less bad option than localizing, which is a return to city-states, which will return to warring with each other.
I would entirely disagree with the direction of this based on what I describe as the internet effect, and what we're seeing as the general trend away from violence is bigger than the trends in the scale of government, but rather more connected to our technological interconnectedness. And, about the dehumanization, this is something now you're back in my wheelhouse. You talk about the training in the military going back to World War I, World War II, and I'm sure you're familiar with the studies on the trigger pulling rates. That in World War I, the rate of pulling the trigger of frontline troops was much lower than it was in World War II, when there was greater training. And then in Vietnam, it was even higher. And when you got to the Gulf War and the war that I was a part of, it was even higher because the propaganda that they're able to impose on the military is better. The dehumanization of the propaganda that you saw, even just in the difference from World War I to World War II, the effectiveness of dehumanization was that much more effective. And now today in the military, we shoot at body-shaped targets in order to condition us for shooting at bodies, because it is so contrary to our human nature to kill. It is abhorrent naturally to the human mind to take the life of another human being. And I'm really glad that you cited that story that I hadn't heard of that the ancient dehumanization phenomena, because it's harder and harder the further we go to do that. And I think the internet is the greatest check on this, and shows that we're ready to move to a world without militaries, to a world with a militia defense or local militaries at most, because you can't convince in this day and age millions of gullible young men to dress up in silly costumes and meet in the middle of a field where none of them live to kill each other because they're wearing different colors. You just can't get away with lying to people like that. And I'll cite two more recent examples. One, Obama tried to get boots on the ground in Syria. And the check on that, you want to talk about checks, it was that there were military members and their spouses holding up these little placards that said, "I did not enlist to fight for Al-Qaeda in Syria. I do not want my husband to die fighting for Al-Qaeda in Syria." And when the powers that be in the United States have been trying to start a war with Iran for a long time. We've seen at this point so many stories of deception come out about nuclear arms and the negotiations. And when they tried to get boots on the ground in Iran, it had to be based on the same premise of, well, everybody in Iran wants you dead. And so we can't just take out the government. We have to go have a force-on-force kind of war. And the people didn't buy it, because I can get on Skype just like I am with you and just as easily call someone in Iran. I can get on YouTube. I can see documentaries about Iran. It's really hard to get people to bomb a foreign country when they can say, hey, I know these people. They're just people too. And that speaks to the universality of human nature that is coming to the forefront with the internet as the biggest check on the things that are contrary to that we've ever had. So now the worst that governments can get away with is these proxy wars, like in Syria, the global war on terror that I was a part of. They can't say everybody in Iraq wants to kill you and we're going to kill everybody in Iraq to protect America. No, they have to say it's a bad government and we're going to liberate the people of Iraq. It's not the same as it used to be. That's a measure of progress, and that's how much harder it's gotten for government to make war. That's a beautiful thing to celebrate. Let's tie government down further. Let's make it harder. Let's, this idea of getting your actual voice and your vote being relevant in how you're governed by bringing government back down to the community level is the next step of progress for humanity.
And I think I totally agree. Communication technologies have always led to holding human authority more accountable. Martin Luther was able to hold the Catholic Church accountable because he had the printing press. So
and now that's everybody, not just government.
Exactly. And so I think, the more communication technology, the more that makes possible. And that is fantastic. But at the same time, even let's run with the narrative that the U.S. government tries to drive about liberating people. And, there's an old Arab saying, right, that it is better to live one day, 1,000 years in tyranny than one day in anarchy. And the problem is that, dictators actually serve a positive social function compared to anarchy. They provide that monopoly on legitimate violence, and they stop the war against all that Hobbes talks about. Now, if you look at what the United States has been doing, removing dictators, well, it creates power vacuums. And into those power vacuums very often rushes something worse, right? What emerges is something like ISIS. And the government is, I'm all for the internet, and I think it's great. And I think it's going to be fantastic in a system like the United States for holding the government accountable. But I have not seen the spontaneous emergence of peace and stability and local communes in Syria or in Eritrea. And I can tell you that the Libyan people in 2011 were so excited to just throw out the dictator. And now there's a lot of them that have a certain nostalgia for Gaddafi because at least there was stability. And so I think that's the thing is that, the governments are necessary. It is necessary to have that check, but then it is also necessary to have that check on governments. And I still feel like, whatever mechanism you're trying to kill the camel by, right, whether it's natural causes or starvation, you're still trying to kill the camel. And I just think we should tie the camel up, and the internet can help us do that.
Well, it's funny that you cite, Libya there, because it's not like Libya had a peaceful transition to, getting rid of Gaddafi. It was a lot of foreign intervention. I mean, I'm sure you probably know more than I do about the American government's covert and other governments' covert interventions in Libya after the war there, after the deposing of Gaddafi. You can't cite that and say that's proof that government helped when government was the cause of all of the problems.
The American government didn't help. Right? But the American government has meddled endlessly in other countries' affairs, right? Which is what makes this whole, Russia hacking thing so ironic. Right. It's okay for America to mess with everybody else's politics, but Russia can't mess with America's politics. So, I'm not saying, listen, again, I think governments, like the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry, the reason why I ask about internal and external checks is that, there's often this idea that, internal checks are enough within academia or within business or whatever it may be. But there's a shared interest. The tobacco industry had a shared interest, and its shared interest was to lie to the public about the dangers of cigarettes. And it needed external checks in order to, get that information out and blow the whistle and hold them accountable and release all that. In the same way, there is a shared interest both within the people who work for a particular national government. So there is a shared interest within people who work within the government to expand the government's power, because that expands their own personal power. So I absolutely agree that camel will fatten itself up and do all sorts of terrible things. And then there's also a shared interest among the camels of national nation-state governments to defend their interests and to collude in all sorts of unhealthy ways. And that, yes. So there's no disagreement there. I just think that the basic question that you have to ask is, if you look at what happens when governments are removed and there is this opportunity for localization, you get exactly what you want, Adam. You get localization. Libya is massively localized. Tripoli, Misrata, Zintan, Benghazi, they're all their own separate little city-states with their own militias, and they all fight in war for territory.
No. See, what's really sad about the case that you're making, if I may put that imprecise adjective on it, is that it sounds like you're making the case that governments result in an overall reduction of violence. And you're not ignorant of what's going on in the world, but that when you see those pockets of violence and upheaval, you don't see the violence of government behind them, and that you get to sit here in the comfort of the seat of the empire. You get to be a protected citizen of the empire, living a very high standard of life, where the costs of the violence that you live under are exported to these foreign countries. And it's really kind of ironic that you cite Islam, a quote, an Arab saying that, from someone who would probably be advocating for Sharia law, someone who would want that concentration of power, someone who would want that monopoly on violence. And when you see those independent, as you call them, city-states within Libya, you can't say that those are organically come about in any way and that those are independent of any external governing forces. You can't say that they're independent when their entire governing system is the product of a violent American intervention that caused thousands of people to die, and just write that off and say, oh, Adam, that's your model. That's what you're talking about. No, I'm talking about the opposite of that. I'm talking about getting rid of the central violent government that is the United States, that has caused all of that violence, that has caused all of the death and destruction throughout the Middle East and now in Syria and throughout the rest of the world in the course of the empire and as the course of all empires before it.
Well, I'm not saying that. And what I'm actually saying is that, as I said, we're in a situation now like the United States was in with the Articles of Confederation. You have one state among 196 nation states that has a disproportionate amount of power. The United States has seigniorage effects. It's able to, print the world's reserve currency. It has this massive military. It provides positive social functions like keeping the sea lanes open and keeping trade open with the U.S. Navy, but that often it abuses that power. And I think much of that abuse of power comes down to the United States' own bad understanding of the source of its own success, of its own bad model, that what you do is you simply remove a dictator and then you progress to democracy. So I think that there are a lot of problems with the way the United States uses its power. And I personally would prefer a more accountable system where, there wasn't an aristocracy of citizenship. And there is an aristocracy of citizenship. And, we can like the fact that we have passport privilege, or we cannot like it. But there it is, and our responsibility is to make sure that we're using it properly. Because although, the United States misuses its power internationally, I think we would all be far worse off if the U.S. Navy did not police the sea lanes and did not keep international trade going. If international trade was to collapse, we would all die. Maybe not you, Adam, because I think you have Rick, Walking Dead, Negan-style potential to form some sort of militia. And, I look forward, and I think that's the reality is that, when you become, in this post-apocalyptic scenario, the new tribal leader, you're often going to have to use violence. And you're going to have to use demonstrative violence in order to intimidate your opposition and let them know that if they screw with you, you will kill them. So it's going to be hard for you, and you're going to have, as a good man like Rick, you'll be pushed to places that you didn't want to go.
You know, it's funny that you paint this ridiculous dystopic picture, because you can't really attack the heart of my argument here. You are
I attacked the heart of your argument.
Oh, did we lose him?
Yeah.
And I think your entire worldview is relatively naive when it comes to government, when you say us and government, and it seems like you've really bought hook, line, and sinker what you were taught in, dare I suggest, government-run schools, when they said that, you know, government is of and by the people. No, it's made up of individuals. You know, the idea that people can't be angels, so we need government. It's like, well, there are no perfect people, so we're going to put people in charge and give them power and authority over other people. I mean, it's a ridiculous contradiction to think that that can work. You present this ideal that government is somehow of and by the people when you know better. You're a student of history. You know that government has always been about serving the super class. It has always been about the corrupt powers behind it. You mentioned shipping lanes. Why does it control the shipping lanes and do the right thing as you might be able to present it as most of the time? It's so that it can do the wrong thing long enough to be able to serve those corrupt interests. That's always why it existed. And, you know, you keep going back to like this idea of human nature, but you present this ideal of government as if it's not made up of people, as if it's some magical institution that somehow transcends the nature of the people who make it up.
Well, I think it's fantastic that, you know, Ricky is getting the debate that he hoped for. That's the most important thing. As long as the the masses are entertained with some bread and circus before everything all collapses. But, you know, you talk about, it's very good of you to paint, you know, my situation as ideal, because everybody is a little bit distrustful of ideals. I personally think that your view of the world is idealistic of, you know, what happens when you dissolve the existing institutions. And if you look at what happened in the French Revolution, they dissolved the existing institutions, and by removing that monopoly on legitimate violence, by removing that coercive power, what ends up happening is you descend into factionalism and sectarianism and the war of all against all. So again, history is a great teacher, and it tells us how will people really behave. You know, we can go and we can look back at, you know, behavior throughout the ages. But I think the important thing, Adam, is that I just, you know, to clarify my view of human nature. My view of human nature is that power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I don't think it matters where that power is. If it's religious power, if it's intellectual power from, you know, science or whatever it may be, if it's business power, if it's government power. And so the point is that we all need to hold each other accountable. And I agree with you, and I'm excited that, you know, the internet is playing a huge role in allowing us to challenge each other's ideas here. And the
ultimate and most distributive mechanism of accountability is the free market.
Well, I think is the free movement of information, but, you know, there's the free market. There's the free market in terms of capitalism, which I'm all for. But I think that, you know, I mean, just as James Madison meant, if men were angels, we would need no government. I think, you know, if businessmen were angels, we would need no, you know, then we wouldn't need any government.
But because men are not angels, we cannot possibly trust them with governments.
No, but that's not the conclusion that Madison reaches. Madison reaches the conclusion that because men aren't angels, we need governments. But then, because men aren't angels, the men in government have to be challenged and have to be held accountable. He sure
benefited from that conclusion, didn't he?
Well, I mean, you know, he may or may not have. I mean, you know, it's easy to discredit his motivations, and, you know, we could talk about what his motivations were. But regardless, I mean, I think that's, you know, I mean, Adam, are you saying that you don't intend to benefit from being president of the United States? Is it
I'm glad that you bring it back to that. I say that I am running for not president of the United States, and really what I'm doing is using this as an opportunity to come in as a bankruptcy agent to manage a peaceful, orderly dissolution. So when I say I'm running for not president, it's not just for legal protection. I mean that very seriously. The platform is to go in and on the first day sign an executive order that would have already laid out a more or less preordained plan for the dissolution, in which I would resign. I would not be president of the United States. I would become custodian of the federal government and appoint within that executive order custodians of each agency who would carry out a more or less preordained process, where my only power would be to oversee that process and to replace heads of those agencies as necessary. Neutralize, privatize, localize. And if I may get back to the VA here, neutralize, that's the obvious one. We immediately declare the federal government of no authority. The IRS has no enforcement powers, or any other federal agency. It is merely now a custodial government. With privatize, a lot of people have the misconception that this means taking a broad public resources, getting a little dry here, taking widespread public resources and putting them in the hands of a few rich jerks. The reality is that it's actually the opposite. My favorite example is the VA, because we have 22 veterans committing suicide every day in America. And again, if you take on a more realistic view of human nature, you understand that the purpose of the VA is not to take care of veterans. It's to make it look like the government is taking care of veterans so that they can appease the people and make it possible for people to still enlist in the military with the false belief that they'll be taken care of by this institution, which is controlled by a few bureaucrats who, through corrupt politicians, answer to a handful of rich jerks. Privatizing the VA would mean, as we liquidate the federal government, we give it an endowment and give every single veteran in America one ownership voting share of that institution as a private charity. And I guarantee when you put those resources directly in the hands of veterans, you're not going to have 22 veteran suicides a day. As for localize, some agencies need to be localized in a responsible, stable manner. We're not talking about the collapse of the Roman Empire here. We can do this in a much more peaceful and orderly process, where things like the Department of Transportation can have its resources and its facilities and its authority transferred down to the state level, along with a number of welfare agencies and other things like that. There's also the process of handling all of the data. We want to make full accountability the norm and standard for government. So basically every single record that we can make public without violating individual privacy will be posted on the internet as soon as we can make it possible. There is a significant process to this. It's not about taking on power. It is really coming in. Yes, I want a job. I want to be able to serve the American people. I'm not going to take any salary from this, but to be the bankruptcy agent of the federal government of the United States, because it's high time that we get this thing out of the way. We come up with a solution as big as the problem. And I think I found a practical way to do this. And because I have a lot of people helping me developing this platform and writing the executive order, and this is, again, 3 years well in advance, we're going to be able to do this in a way that is basically telling the American people, look, you can do this the easy way or the hard way. The hard way is to continue to ignore the problem, to be apathetic, to let the government collapse, and maybe hope that it spares you in its violent death throes as it desperately clings to power, potentially leading to the stateless dystopia, false stateless dystopia situation that you have presented here, Hunter. But if we do this the easy way, it's facing up to the problem and saying, let's take charge of this and be realistic about the current state of affairs of government and people's dependency on it, and come up with a practical, reasonable way forward.
I think the most important thing to take from that is that, as per normal, two humans with different opinions both believe that they see reality as it truly is. And that is precisely why the citizenry should not trust either of us, and they should go out and they should read and they should form their own conclusions, and that the wisdom of crowds will then evolve a solution that is far better than what either of us could come up with. But I think that if you do that, what you're going to find is that you're going to find that the problem is that, any society is a giant game of rock, paper, scissors.
Hey, Hunter.
It's all about these checks and balances, and that you're having to find ways to keep people accountable. And you need consumers check the actions of business by deciding how they spend their money. Consumers check government with their vote if they bother to wake up, pay attention, read, inform themselves, and think about these issues. And then, government can check business, business can check government. And part of the problem is that because these checks on government and business are so ineffective right now, that they are in an unholy alliance. And it is that unholy alliance that has to be broken up. It's like rock and paper are best friends, and they can't do their job if they're not dueling. And to that end, I hope that, this duel has at least inspired people to go out and form their own conclusions.
So rough day of work, huh, Ricky?
Yeah, no, I love this. I mean, this is awesome. I mean, Hunter, are you in a tornado by any chance?
I may be in a tornado wind change. I think the the wind just picked up out here. I can head into a more sheltered area. I think that I think that Adam's society is already coming. It's the winds of change. And I'm just worried that rather than being a soothing breeze, they're going to turn into something much more violent and dystopian. But I better be nice to Adam, because when that does come, I'm going to need him to protect me.
Ask the victims of the American Empire, like a quarter of the children in Fallujah today being born with horrendous birth defects that prevent them from even living normal, healthy lives, if it's going to be soothing to not have the world subject to the American Empire any longer.
Ask the victims of the terror of the French Revolution. Ask the victims of the collapse of Gaddafi's society since the Arab Spring. Ask, the victims of countless stateless societies. And, our
those are not stateless societies.
There are stateless societies. In fact, or if you want to talk about it, they're just the sort of localized government that you're talking about, where you have small local militias that essentially operate like
those are all
gangsters.
satellites of the American Empire.
No, but if you're going to look at human behavior, you can't just sort of, paint this very narrow picture that is a snapshot of modernity. If you paint just a picture based on what you're seeing today, that's one data point. You can't draw conclusions about human nature from one data point. You have to look at lots and lots and lots of pictures side by side so you can see the patterns. And, the reality is that having some sort of empire, the Pax Mongolica, the Pax, Romana, the Pax Britannica, they create peace, they create prosperity, and they create a large hive mind that is able to generate levels of wealth and prosperity that are much larger than what you would see without. Is the world more prosperous today under the American Empire than it was under the British or the Chinese or the Roman empires?
Despite the empire. Despite the empire.
See, that's always the logic of the Marxists. We would be even wealthier if we lived in my, super government, no business, utopian socialist paradise. And it's great. Like these are compelling narratives. And listen, Adam, Marx managed to sell Lenin managed to sell the Russian people on the Marxist vision, and you may succeed in selling the Americans on this vision. And that's why I'm really glad I also have Dutch citizenship, because instead of relying on you to protect me, I can go to another state where I will be protected from violence by much stronger.
Oh, no. See, again, you misunderstand. Like you misunderstand. You will have better protection than you ever had possible when the protection services required by society are accountable to you. Have you ever called the police for help? Have you ever called the police for help?
Yeah, I have. I found that the service to general sometimes they're useful. They do try and bust me for jaywalking, which I think is a stupid rule. And
don't you want your protection to not do that? What I'm offering you is a chance to have those services without the shitty parts. And you're saying, no, let's have a central authority that's unaccountable, so I have to put up with the shitty parts.
No, but see, that's the point. What I want to wake up the American people so that we go and tie up the camel and make the services better. The problem is that what you're talking about private security services. And private security services turn into militias.
Security services.
And militias
accountable security services.
Yeah, but see what holds them accountable. And what's to hold the problem is I'm not worried about, listen, that's great. So I pay my security service, my mercenaries, their money, and then they have an incentive to serve me. But then along comes Ricky. Ricky with his construction company, and he has a very nice Jaguar that he's seen, and he's got, and so what he does is he goes and he buys my mercenaries off. And, like the Second Sons in Game of Thrones, he says, work for Ricky instead and just kill him and take his stuff. And then I'm dead, Adam. And where am I?
I wish I had the economic metaphors at the tip of my brain to refute that, but that is absolutely contrary to the reality of free market economics. That is so unrealistic. It is so out of line with what the demands of the market would put up with. What would happen to all of the bad actors in that scenario would be far better accountability than we have today under government, where they can buy off an injustice system. But I'd like to turn it back to Ricky at this. Well, actually, first, Hunter, I'd like to ask you, how long is your book?
It's about 300 pages.
Yeah, well, I got my message out in a third of that. So if you guys want to check it out, you can get the whole comprehensive vision in a way that would never come through in a conversation like this. My book is free in every digital format, including the audiobook at the Freedom Line. And Hunter, I really look forward to seeing what the response to this is. I do want to say I do you a favor here, because I really do intend to continue following this conversation. It's been fascinating. I very much appreciate you sharing your perspective this way, and I look forward to seeing what both of your audiences say in response to this whole conversation. But I'd really like to hear from Ricky what he has thought so far. And I do have to say, I don't have a whole lot of time, as I do have to go pick up my car and get on the road for LA this evening.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say, amazing conversation. I turned into the spectator that I knew I would, and just listen to you guys go at it. And I think it's awesome to see you guys challenge each other. And I think we all agree that the problem is institutions, and I think we all agree that wherever there is a place where you can get the upper hand, people are going to take advantage of that. Corrupt people will get into places of power. I think and then we differ where that takes us, and what's human tendency, and maybe I do think that we're evolving, and as time goes by, every young generation, we're a product of our environment, but there's people born today who were born in a much safer, less dangerous place, and that environment's going to lead them to a less dangerous, less violent place, and I think it just continues. So I think you go down that road, I can see where Adam can see the future and kind of see where that might lead us. But I also understand Hunter's perspective that, it's not, we always talk about government. We talk about these people looking for incentives to help themselves, but corporations, you can look at corporations as government is just a tool. The same way the gun argument, for example, we don't blame the gun, right? We blame what's the root cause of it? The
responsible agents.
Exactly. Yeah. So the government, couldn't you also look at government as just a tool that corporations are using to monopolize something, or to take, for example, Rockefeller was the first billionaire. It was the government who forced them to basically, separate. It wasn't, so, what would you say?
And if you look at, I think that's the key word there, Ricky. You couldn't have said it better. Government is a tool. Business is a tool. Everything is a tool. And the point is, the tool can be used or abused. And listen to Adam, and just like Marx, he will line up all the abuses, and he will make you think they're only abuses, but there are also positive uses.
That's a misrepresentation. Oh, come on! I've engaged with you honestly and said that no, I have conceded exactly that point, and now you're acting as if you're speaking as if I hadn't, and you're really misrepresenting me here, and I think a dishonest way.
Well, inevitably, people like, I've been accused of misrepresenting, new atheists. I've been accused of misrepresenting, social justice warriors. I've been accused of misrepresenting lots of people, because the point is that, people like to paint a certain narrative that drives their feelings and their intuitions. And I think, Adam, that, you have started from a great theoretical set of principles, as the libertarians in general have. But I don't think that the conclusions that you reach, even if your narratives internally make sense to you, I believe honestly that, you've seen the abuses of the American government, right? You've seen them in Iraq. You've seen horrible things. And I am sorry that you had to live through that. I'm sorry that you had to go through a training that deliberately dehumanized other human beings. But at the same time, I don't think that just because there are those legitimate and genuine abuses, that means that we are better off not having the tool that Ricky is talking about.
Government is violence, and the sooner the tool of violence is rendered obsolete by humanity that universally affirms it, the better.
Can we all agree that we need a part 2 to this conversation? I think we need to get. I haven't. You know, this is like a movie that once you're done, you're like, I hope there's a fucking sequel. This was too good.
All right, well, let's tease it out of the comments then. Everybody who's watching this, comment below, share this link,
please
share this conversation. As much as it is frustrating for me, I'm honored to be included at this kind of level of thought. I'm really honored by both of you guys, you know, engaging in it this way. And I think it's a really cool thing that in the age of the internet, we're able to have a conversation like this and really include so many more people. So please comment if you want to see a next round. Maybe we'll do a question and answer, or like questions for both of us or something fun like that. But Ricky, you've done an amazing job moderating. You've been awesome.
No,
I think I think we could certainly trust you to host this again.
Yeah, thank you. I think I did a great job myself, and you know, I didn't even stretch. I thought I was gonna maybe pull something because all the work I was doing, but no, yeah, it was good. But honestly, part 2, definitely let people know where you guys can get your books. I know obviously Hunter still does a podcast. I'm not sure. I know you're still doing your YouTube channel. That seems to be where you're not really.
No, we're recruiting delegates to win the nomination of the Libertarian Party in 2020. And if you want to get on board, check out thefreedomline.com. I will say it's been a shift in focus for me from going from trying to build an audience and get views and likes and, you know, be big on social media to really reaching as many people as possible by going out and doing shows like this and getting on other people's platforms and going out and doing a national tour. So if you want to come debate me in person, I throw this out as an offer to the general public here. If you come to one of my events, they're generally 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 p.m. The first hour will just be hanging out before I give my talk. You can debate me on my Facebook live stream if you want. You can put me on the spot as has been done so well here today. You can come and do whatever you want, promote your own thing, whatever. But yeah, I'm really grateful to be included in this. It's a great conversation, and more importantly, I think we're the kind of people who are seeing past that, who are saying, like it's really not about just being right about everything. It really is, we stake our credibility on the way that we engage intellectually with integrity and open-mindedness. And I think that's huge. And I'm just, it's, I really, it's conversations like this that make me really feel like I'm part of the progress of humanity. And I'm very grateful for everybody who's made this possible.
Yeah, no, we're all, I truly believe in the ripple effect, and I think we're all a part of it. We're all, I don't think sometimes we all understand the impact we're having and people who are listening. I mean, you guys know the power of the internet. The stuff is being watched and listened to. I'm sure you meet people all the time, Adam, that are huge fans of yours, and you've changed their lives or whatnot. And same thing with Hunter, with his mixed mental arts and all the community that he's built there. So, I mean, I think you guys are doing amazing work. It's truly a pleasure to have you guys on, and I'm glad I'm even in the position to be just an immigrant from Portugal who works a full-time job, and with the power of the internet got to, do this and have the ability to join two great minds that I truly respect and appreciate, and have you guys go at it. And I definitely hope there's a part 2. Please, people, share this. Both perspectives, both opinions, I think, are very important to get out there and share. And if you're like me, just a curious mind trying to figure things out, this is a perfect opportunity to kind of just help figure those thoughts out and those ideas and challenge yourself, just like you guys challenged each other. So thank you so much, guys. I'm very unprofessional. I should have asked you how much time you guys had before we started. Yeah,
I really do have to go. I got to be in LA tonight. My ride's waiting on me, but I'll let y'all have the last word.
Hey, take care, Adam. Thank you.
All right, take care and have fun in LA.
Always do.
Thanks, Adam. Take care. Thanks, Hunter. I really appreciate you coming on, man. I definitely hope to get a part 2, hopefully in the near future, because I think that you and Adam definitely could have went for another hour easily.
Well, I think the main thing, Ricky, is that you wanted entertainment, you wanted a debate, and so I just wanted to make sure that that Ricky got a good show. So that that was my number one concern.
Well, like Adam said before, when we were kind of just emailing back and forth, is it wasn't so much that I was looking for entertainment or debate. I wanted, I wanted you guys to I wanted to see two people that I know have well thought out ideas and opinions, and just challenge each other. And I think from a spectator, and I happen to be the host, but like I knew what was going to happen. I was going to turn into a spectator because I was so intrigued in what you guys were saying and how you guys were challenging each other, that I think people are going to get a lot out of this. But unfortunately, you do need to make it entertaining and make it a debate, like like Adam said in that email, to get those clicks, to get those hits, to kind of share ideas and get this out there. And me and you, we've talked about it in the past, how things like Joe Rogan and Steve Crowder going at it gets all these hits and everybody talks about it, or this debate with that debate, everybody, so it's just causing a little bit of friction, unfortunately, sometimes is the best way of getting attention on something. So, and I think that's, yeah, I
think that's part of it, is that we have to get past the idea that that's unfortunate, because I think that's so much of, the problem with academia is that there is this focus on trying to have a super nice, cordial, we don't, they confuse, this is sort of what we talked about on our last podcast, the difference between being nice and having healthy debate. Like, I think that was a healthy debate, right?
Yeah,
we don't agree. I think we have very different fundamental assumptions that have been formed by different sets of experiences and different reading and different sets of information. But, the main thing for me is that it's very clear, like you could just look at Adam's face, that he cares.
Absolutely.
And that, he sincerely, based on the things that he has seen, and he is rightly opposed to, the abuses of the American government, the abuses of government, and, what to do about that problem, we disagree on. But the major thing for me is that, is that I think that apathy is the big problem, and there's no doubt that Adam is not an apathetic man. He cares.
Yeah, no, well, what I meant was I don't think that the friction in the debate is necessarily a bad thing. I think it is absolutely a good thing. I just think it's a bad thing that sometimes you feel like or at least I feel like you almost would have to force it, even if it's not there, just to get hits or get it. I think when it comes out organically, that's a great thing. I think it's awesome. I just think when it's not organic, it's not good. And it makes me wonder, because like we've talked about this, I think, on the last podcast when me and you were together, about how I think we were talking about Cara Santa Maria, and how being raised a super religious kind of you rebel against that and you turn into this super atheist. And I wonder if Adam being, and maybe this is a question for next time we all get together, being kind of screwed over by the government, lied to, put in harmful situations, possibly having people he loved and friends of his get hurt or die. Maybe that is the same situation where you're rebelling against a lie and somebody that you think was dishonest to you and did you dirty. Do you think it's a similar psychology?
Well, I'm a little reticent about saying anything, when he's not here to be able to respond. But I think that, that is certainly, I can tell you that for me, there are plenty of times when I felt betrayed by the abuses of an institution or the abuses of a tool. I have my own massive disappointments with, academia, and, there's a period when you're angry and you're like, just fuck that. Like, obviously I did never want to throw out science or sort of throw out academia, but I can certainly understand that impulse to just, like Peter Schiff said, at some point I was like, we were talking about the FDA, right? Peter is a libertarian. And I was talking, I was like, Peter, I agree. I'm sure there are abuses to the FDA. I have no doubt that there are abuses to the FDA. And it's like, but don't we have to figure out what is baby and what is bathwater? And he says, there is no baby. Or if there is a baby, it's so small, we should just throw it away anyway. And I, in general, am very skeptical of that thinking, even if I understand emotionally completely where it comes from.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So thank you again, Hunter. I cannot thank you enough for all the hours and hours you have taken out of your day for my podcast. I mean, I think the very first time you were on, I lost the audio, so it was like 2 hours. Then you came on, and we tried to recreate that, and I had another 2 hours. Then you took 3 hours out of your day in Dartmouth, and now this. So, you know, the same way that one thing I love about Adam, and that's why putting you guys together I thought was so important, because regardless of opinions on beliefs or ideas or perspectives, one thing I think nobody can deny is how much both of you really care, and how much you guys really are trying to make a difference. And I am attracted to that. I am drawn to that, because I also want to be a part of that process, and hope that I can be. And it's motivating for me. It's you guys have been a huge motivation. You know, Adam's traveling all over the world. I mean, you obviously don't have to do podcasting. You don't have to debate these people. You don't have to you know, go on to Joe Rogan's show and you know, and call out Sam Harris just for the purpose of getting attention on your work and what you're trying to do and spreading ideas. But you do it because you truly care. Like you know, you've said to me many of times, it wasn't about Sam Harris. He just happened to be you know, just a technique of getting attention on what you're trying to spread, and idea sex, and you know, getting people to challenge each other and share these ideas and understand where these ideas come from. So I love meeting these sincere people, and it's truly a pleasure to be able to meet you guys and really be a part of this whole process. And hopefully you guys, I'm going to tell Adam the same thing in an email: put this podcast anywhere you would like, upload it, share it. All my stuff is open source, so anybody listening, I know in the past people have taken my podcast and posted on their YouTube channel or on their website. That's completely okay. It's about sharing the ideas. It's about sharing the conversations. It's not about trying to draw attention to my podcast or me myself, you know, just as an individual. So so thanks again, Hunter. It's Friday. You're probably not in Dartmouth, but you're somewhere else that's probably beautiful, so you should probably be enjoying yourself. And thank you so much, Hunter. I can't thank you enough for taking the time for being with me again.
Thank you, Ricky. Always. Like, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you know, here's to letting that ripple turn into a wave.
Yeah, let's hope so. So I can stop pouring cement for a living one day.
All right, I'll talk to you soon, my man.
Hey, take
Bye.
care. Hey, have a great weekend. Thanks, Hunter.
You too. Yep. Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.